Okay, hello everyone, and today I'm going to recap my rewatch experience of Big Brother 19 in this review slash retrospective. And honestly, I was never one of those people who thought that Big Brother 19 was the worst season from 2017 onwards. I thought that it was one of the worst ones, but never the worst. But after rewatching this season, I'm kind of leaning in the popular direction of this being the worst one. It having so much drama was why it was never dead last on my rankings in prior years, but rewatching this for the first time since it being live, it really, really drained me. It really, really frustrated me. And the drama wasn't as entertaining as I remembered. There were a lot of gang ups. A lot of the drama was also very orchestrated, so it wasn't even natural. And even a lot of the people that were orchestrating these arguments didn't even know what they were fighting about. The gameplay from everyone but Paul essentially is some of the worst that I've ever seen. And if it wasn't the worst, it was non existent in general. So it's just a very frustrating experience. You can predict everything that happened from the beginning to the end, who went home, who would go home weeks earlier, or who would go home weeks later, but it was planned like a month beforehand, and it was just not pleasant to watch. It also doesn't help that no one in the cast is really likable, as even the underdogs are unlikable, and obviously the herd is very unlikable, and the people who aren't the underdogs or the herd that aren't unlikable, they're very forgettable, so there's really no win here. Week 1 is easily the best week of the season by far because there are a lot of interesting dynamics that happened and the drama wasn't toxic at this point, though there's a few arguments that definitely hinted at to what was to come with the season. But it's never a good thing when a season peaks in the first week, and by a lot as well. Christmas is a CrossFit champion entrepreneur who does everything and a social media influencer. Jason is a rodeo clown and an auctioneer who knows how to read things. Alex has a bunch of hobbies since she is a gamer. Kevin talks about how his lineage has mobsters, essentially. And they play the typical music as well to go along with that mobster stuff, and is a stay-at-home father. Dominique is a nuclear engineer where she has to be tough because she is a woman engineer of color, where she's also hugely religious and a YouTuber. Mark is a personal trainer who is a teddy bear who lost his parents early on in his life. Elena is a radio personality who is very unfiltered and her mouth will get her in trouble, which kind of happens in the season, and Ramses is a comic cosplayer and a superfan. They try to set up Dominique and Jason being aligned, which never goes anywhere, and Mark not liking either one of them, but it doesn't really happen in the season. Elena is immediately interested in Mark once they enter the house, and Mark is immediately interested in Christmas, which I found interesting, especially with how contentious their relationship becomes throughout the season. Cody is in construction sales and was in the Marines and the Air Force while being an intelligence analyst. Raven owns her dance studio and talks about looking into ghosts or whatever. Josh talks about being a Latina Cuban Floridian who is a business owner and hustles for everything. Megan is a dog walker and knows how to get animals to do what she wants, and was also in the military training to be an interrogator. Cameron is a microbiologist who also does athletic things like bike around, and he isn't going to be an awkward nerd, as he is social, which unfortunately doesn't age well for him. Jessica is a VIP cocktail waitress who will use her looks in the game and is a super fan, where it's a connection to her father who passed away 3 years ago. Matt is a social guy and is extremely loyal, while mentioning that he has gotten grades since he was 18. Jillian is a timeshare sales representative where you have to sell things very well, and mentions that she and her family went to Tijuana to do weight loss surgery a year ago, which, okay. Josh talks about being cold-hearted, which he hasn't been on any officials over the last 6 years. Megan does not get along with females, which is also a horrible sign, but kind of fitting as to what her fate would be. Christmas is attracted to Matt, and we see Matt and Raven immediately connect. Cody is immediately attracted to his future wife, and Jessica is immediately attracted to her future husband, and Jess is very attracted to Jessica, which is very interesting since things go south between them almost immediately throughout the entire season. And Matt is attracted to Christmas and Jessica. Ramses, Alex, and Megan talk about how there are a bunch of superfans in the cast, and it seems like they are vibing with one another very well. Cameron does not vibe well with the cast so far, and is overconfident about his abilities, from what I could immediately tell. Ramses tells people that he is a cosplayer, and the entire room goes silent, since they don't know what that is, and he clearly isn't vibing well with most of them. Mark is very attracted to Elena, so it is reciprocal, and Cody immediately does not like Josh, since he is too loud and will lose his mind. A few of the women are lusting over Matt as well. Kevin clicked the temptation to get the $25,000, and the choice will come with the personal consequence of not competing in the first HOH competition. And the second consequence is that a veteran is going to come into the house, though they're obviously going to find a way to bring the veteran back. Paul enters the house and is in the position that Paul complained about the veterans last year, where we see and hear Jessica standing for Paul, where Cody is already planning on backdooring Paul as soon as he can. Ramses, Jillian, Alex, and Megan talk about Paul being in the house and how they're going to align, but Jillian does not want Paul in the house. Julie tells them that Paul is taking one of their spots in the house, and one of them will be booted tonight, but they have to woo Paul to not go home. And of course, we have the shitty day 1/day 2 twist, which no one liked in the prior 2 seasons, but they are insistent and trying to make it a thing. And it's even worse here. Though I guess the boot has more chance to save themselves compared to the other 2, and even the one after this. There are 9 friendship bracelets as Paul gets one, and he has to give the 8 other ones to people to get safety. Cody barely puts in effort with Paul, which is a horrible move, but it's the first of many for him, and Josh tells Paul that he's a super fan of him, which kind of turns Paul off. Paul gives Kevin, Raven, Dominique, Mark, Jason, Jessica, Ramses, and Elena bracelets, while Josh thinks that Paul has this huge plan with him, though he's clearly not interested in Josh at this point. The first competition of the season is where people have to choose safety apples. Cody wins the competition, so he is safe, and the people with the safe apples are Josh and Megan. Christmas, Cameron, and Jillian remain on the block, and they have to convince people to keep them in through a vote, as they choose to have a vote. Christmas and Jillian choose this, instead of a competition, which Cameron chose, to determine their fate. We see the nominees campaign for their lives, and Cameron does an awkward dance for Elena and Jessica, and it ends up with Cameron being evicted in an 8-3-2 vote. I mean, there really isn't much to say about Cameron. It's clear that he wasn't going to fit in with the cast, and he was struggling, and based on how the other nerd did in the season, he wasn't going to last long anyways. I don't have much to say about his personality, other than it coming off as a bit cringe during the one day we saw. But because he had more chances than Jody and Glenn did to save himself, I can't see him as robbed, or at least as robbed compared to them. Unfortunately, it sucks that a superfan had to only play the Big Brother game that they spent months preparing for and weeks being sequestered for, only to be in there for like 12 hours. Paul doesn't get why the awkward nerd was voted out over the athletic threat in Christmas, which I found interesting because we all know that the two became very close. And Christmas is going to remember the 2 people who voted her out, though I don't think anything comes of it. People are speculating about the vote, and Megan is wondering if the guys are already aligned. Josh is having a hard emotional time, and people are seeing that he is a liability, where Josh tells Mark and Jason that Ramses and the girls are sticking together, as Megan mentioned during the competition that Cody and Matt are aligned together, which is a really dumb move on her part. Megan is telling her allies that she wants to nominate Paul, Cody, and Mark, where Alex also mentions that she doesn't trust Paul, though this clearly doesn't last long at all. Josh is telling Christmas that he doesn't trust people, and he's crying already since he misses his family, and they are quickly bonding, where Josh tells Christmas that he doesn't trust Megan. During the HOH competition, you can save your team by winning the competition, and you can get the safety apple, where you will be safe as well, but your team won't be immune. Josh knows that he's not in a great position within the house, so he grabs the safety apple and starts lashing out at Jillian and Elena about everyone gunning for him, yelling that he isn't going anywhere. Cody calls Josh a loser during the competition as he brushes him, as he noticed Josh taking the apple, and that he was in his way, so great social game on Cody's part. Josh decides to attack Megan, telling her that she's a snake, how he likes everyone in the house but her, and really lays into her for absolutely no reason. Cody and Paul compete in the second part of the competition, and Cody tells Paul that he is safe no matter what. Remember this for later. Cody ends up winning the HOH competition and wants to divide the house. Josh decides to go after Megan again when they are all in the house, and she makes sly remarks, or that's what Josh is claiming that she's doing. And he doesn't like the way she's playing the game, where she's attacking people, and he thinks that she would have campaigned against him if he didn't have the safety apples, which she denies, and it's actually true since she was not after him at this point. Paul is trying to have fun with the house guests, and Cody is glaring at him, but he tells Matt that he wants those 2 and Mark to align with one another, the athletic, younger white men, where Cody approaches Mark with the same thing. Josh ends up apologizing to Megan about arguing with her, and she speaks to Cody to pitch her case, and he literally gives her nothing. But this is probably her first time speaking to him in the house, so that's kind of on her as well. Cody is interested in aligning with the Babes, which consists of Jessica, Raven, Elena, Christmas, and Dominique, who is on the outer ring of his alliance, where him, Mark, and Matt are in the inner rings. Everyone else is considered to be a part of the outsiders in his mind. Cody speaks to Mark about Alex, Megan, and Jillian being the targets, and he tells Mark that if they can, he needs to backdoor Paul, but the latter doesn't say anything to Cody to reject it, but Mark doesn't want Paul called himself. Cody nominates Megan and Jillian for eviction. Paul thinks that the newbies are dumb for not nominating him, and Cody mentions that he's targeting Megan since he doesn't like her, and mentions this in his speech. And Megan is not like how Cody and Josh attacked her personally. She's being very anxious and is not doing well in the house, while Jillian is pissed off about being nominated again. Josh gives Jillian advice on how to handle the block, and we see the start of Mark and Elena's showmance, as well as Cody and Jessica's showmance, and then Matt and Raven's showmance. Josh is talking about how he is going nuts in the house, and he is talking about how he is missing his parents, where the house guests have to console him. And Mark tells him that he doesn't have parents since they are deceased. It's interesting that Mark likes Josh now at this point, where their relationship gets very turbulent in and outside of the house. Megan overhears Jessica calling Alex Paola, which isn't good, but Megan tells Alex that Jessica called her Panda, since she thinks that it is a bit racist, since Alex is Asian. Paul tells Jody about how Jessica is a racist apparently and made a racist Asian comment, and Jessica knows that it's because she called Alex Paola and wants to snap Megan in half. Jessica speaks to Alex about how she didn't want to speak to Cody since he is speaking to Alex and mentions that Megan did this for gameplay purposes. Jessica didn't say Panda, but she did call her Paola, which is definitely a microaggression. Alex is very pissed off and lashes out at Megan about lying on everyone and saying that she made up a racist comment on Jessica. Jessica tells Megan that she is lying and never called Alex Panda, but Megan is insistent about it being what Jessica said. Alex says that she isn't Megan's friend anymore, and Jessica never owns up to saying Alex is Paola, which is still problematic. Jillian and Alex leave the room, where Megan enters and she goes into the DR to quit. Apparently she quits because she has a lot of PTSD from her time in the military, where she was unfortunately taken advantage of. I remember a lot of people had very high feelings about Megan before entering the game, but she kind of crumbled immediately. She was telling people too many things about who she was targeting before anything was said and done. She only really stuck with Alex, Jillian, and Ramses, and they clearly didn't have any power in the house, and she got really paranoid and her nerves got the best of her. But in hindsight and knowing what the season turned into, it was definitely best that she left now, instead of having to deal with all of the nasty attacks that happened throughout the season. Cody tells the house about Megan's expulsion and he has to nominate someone else, where he is happy that he was able to get Megan out and now he will be able to get someone else out. Raven calls Alex Pow Pow, so it was clearly a thing that they were all saying, and tells Cody to tell her that she is a pawn, but is really the target. But Cody wants to keep Alex around, since he sees her as a competitor. We are introduced to the temptation twist, where America has to vote for someone to have safety for the first 3 weeks, and of course, Paul, the veteran that the BB fan base has watched all of last summer, so he already has a built-in fan base, wins it. Kevin and Jason are getting close, since they are the two married men in the house, and they're older than the rest of the guys in the house. Cody tries to talk game with Alex while they are working out, and he is trying to get her to come on their side, and she essentially rejects it, which is a very dumb move on her part, and says that she would target the people on her side, which is even dumber. Cody has no choice but to nominate Alex against Jillian for eviction. Alex knows that she is the target, and in between making it out, she tells Cody that he was choking up over nominating Alex, which rubs her the wrong way. Jessica wants her and that connection out of that house. Paul speaks to Cody to console him about the nominations, and Cody doesn't give him anything in that conversation, where he isn't buying it since Paul did the same thing last season, which is kind of true to an extent. Alex tells Jason that the girls are going to get far because they're going to latch onto strong men, and they want to target Cody and Jessica, where it is revealed that Alex and Jason are working together and hoping that he will veto her if he wins it. Cody speaks to Alex about why she didn't join his side, and she says that the girls don't like her, where Cody regrets nominating her. I don't know why he cares so much since they don't have a relationship, and it's even stupider for Alex to tell the person that is aligned with the people that she doesn't like that she is after them and continuously insults them. But I'm not shocked that she is one of those girls. Ramses has to be the third nominee for one in the next few weeks since Paul picked a number in the temptation competition 2, and Ramses was the second person who entered, so he got cursed. Cody throws the veto to Alex, which Jessica and Dominique immediately notice. Jessica tells her that he wants Alex to be pulled off, and she confronts Cody about it, since Alex is not on their side of the house. Alex even knows that Cody threw it, and she tells Jason about it, since he mentioned that he has a plan after she won the veto. Cody does have a plan, but he isn't going to tell anyone about it, and Paul enters the room to mention that her closest ally is Jason, but Ramses is a good option as well, since he is gathering information. Paul is doing the same thing that Paul did last season, where Paul kisses up to the majority and gives Paul's opinions out there. Jessica tells Cody that Alex being around is going to put everyone in their alliance in jeopardy, and he keeps on denying that he threw the competition, and she tells him to play it safe, which he tells her that he won't do. Paul speaks to Cody once again and asks for any ideas, but Cody continues to brush Paul off as he's brushing his teeth, which is creeping Paul out, and Paul knows that something is off. Cody isn't going to tell anyone about his Paul plan until the ceremony, and Christmas thinks that it will be Jason that is nominated, where she reassures him that they are fine, despite no one having a solid read on Cody. Cody tells Jason that he isn't going on the blog, and he asks Jason to not nominate Dominique or the couples if he wins the HOH next week. I see what Cody is doing here, but the request is way too unrealistic, as one, he's showing his cards about all the people he's working with, and two, that's way too many people to protect. But Jason of course agrees with it to avoid being on the block, and Cody throws Paul and Christmas under the bus in this conversation, who everyone in this alliance are working with, and they assume that Cody is in an alliance with them too. Alex takes herself off the block, and Cody nominates Paul as the replacement nominee, but because Paul has a pendant of protection, Paul cannot be nominated. Cody then decides to nominate Christmas as the replacement nominee, which blindsides his entire alliance. Christmas and Paul are rightfully livid, and Cody's entire alliance is really pissed off as well, since their alliance just got split up due to this. Christmas calls out Cody, and they continue going at it upstairs by him promising to keep her in jury and her being in his alliance, but doing the exact opposite, where he is now complaining about nominating a third of the house, which he was initially breaking about on the feet before this happened. And while this is happening, Jessica is going at it with Paul about lying about the pendant of protection, and she isn't going to save her by distancing herself from Cody, where Christmas ends up lashing out on Jessica as well. Josh tells Paul that the only people he is aligned with is Christmas and Paul, which is interesting that this was the case from very early on. Matt, Raven, and Elena don't want to boot Christmas, and they all tell Paul that they didn't know, where they were pushing Jason to be nominated. Jessica tells Cody that she's annoyed with the entire situation, where she mentions that it will look like he played both sides of the house. Mark tells Cody that he will vote out Christmas, since Mark doesn't want to turn on Cody at this point. Jessica speaks to the other Shermantes and is trying to keep it together, but Elena tells them that she is keeping Christmas, and Jessica says that it doesn't make sense for her to keep Christmas now, where Mark wants all of them to stay together, which is ideal for him, and Jessica could have easily just flipped to keep Christmas, but it shows her lack of strategic tact, in my opinion. So Christmas is riding Jason's back, and they run into the backyard, but Jason ends up dropping her, and she broke her foot, which she knows about since she knows her body extremely well due to the industry that she's in. Christmas has to go to the hospital, and while this is happening, Paul campaigns to keep Christmas in the house, and she comes back in the house to tell them that she has torn ligaments, and Mark rants about how he wants Christmas gone. Mark is regretful about how he has treated Christmas over the last few days, since she mentioned that he didn't speak to her when she came back, where a few people did. Christmas makes a very antagonistic speech against Jessica and Cody, and Jillian is evicted in an 8-4 vote. I mean, what is there to really say about Jillian? She was on the block the entire time she was there, and she was literally just furniture, and was kind of like a lizard or whatever reptile who just blends and camouflages to the environment that's around them. While she seemed nice, she let the game happen around her, and she wasn't an interesting personality either, so her going here was the best from a character standpoint, dynamic standpoint, and probably for her well-being, since that's got really nasty after this. Week 2 is of course nowhere near exciting as week 1, though a lot of the signs of the toxicity that would happen throughout the season was prevalent here. When you solely focus on this week, you would think that a lot of it is karmic, since Cody was the one who started the atmosphere, and everyone else was just reacting to his bad move and his behavior, as well as Jessica too. So Jessica and Christmas go at it as soon as Jillian leaves the house, since Jessica didn't appreciate that Christmas attacked her during her speech, where Jessica wasn't allowed to speak during the eviction on live TV, so she calls Christmas a coward. Christmas calls Jessica a liar, which the latter denies, and Christmas tells Jessica to get out of her face. Cody calls out Mark for flipping, and he tells him that the votes were not there. Cody also knows that Josh is one of the people who flipped, and he asked him about it, which causes to get confrontation about quote-unquote being grilled, and Cody has to be restrained from Josh. Damn near the entire house helps Paul win the HOH, since it would be so ironic if he was the one who sent Cody home, or Paul was the one who sent Cody home. The drama continues after the competition, where Cody believes that it was Josh and Ramses were the ones that flipped. Ramses didn't flip, where Kevin did flip, but he never even thinks it was Kevin. I hate to bring it up, but I wonder if there's some bias as to why Cody believed that those two were the ones that flipped, and especially Ramses. Josh is trying to apologize to Cody, but it just causes another argument with him and the showman, where Cody tells him that he doesn't want to have this conversation, where he needs to shut the fuck up. Jessica continues the argument about him blatantly lying to her, and she calls him a little girl, where he should have just told her that he wasn't going to vote Christmas out, where Josh mentions that they barely spoke to him, where she said that he should have said that the entire time, which is true. Cody decides to insert himself now and says Josh makes victim noises, though Cody does that a lot himself throughout the season. Josh ends up crying once again, and the house comforts him, which is something that he will do the entire season. Dominique mentions that she feels safe with Paul in power, and it's crazy how poorly this ages, and Paul tells Paul's herd, that Paul wants Cody out of the house. Jessica decides to not go in the HOH room and to go into the diary room instead. Horrible move on her part. Paul tells the herd that Paul wants Matt and Raven as pawns to backdoor Cody, though Dominic and Mark mentions that it makes sense for people on the quote-unquote other side to be the pawns, so they can control the votes. Christmas ends up winning the temptation competition, which is the rank of replacement, where she can take someone out of playing in the veto competition, where she'll play instead, and she curses Jason and Jody to wear the frog costumes for the entire week. Paul decides to listen to Mark's requests to not nominate their own people, and he tells Paul tells Alex and Josh that they need to be a pawn for him to backdoor Cody. Ramses decides to nominate himself this week, since it's clear that Cody is the target, and Paul nominates Josh and Alex for eviction. Cody knows that he's getting backdoored, and Josh speaks to Ramses about how he cannot win the veto, since Cody won't be able to be nominated if Ramses wins, while assuring him that he's safe this week. Actually, I don't remember if it was Josh or Paul that was telling Ramses this in the specific conversation. Anyways, Ramses walks in and out of her room, and it sketches Paul out even more, so Paul tells Kevin to reassure Ramses, and we get a lot of sappy Cody and Jessica content, since they know that their time in BB is essentially over if their names aren't picked for the veto competition. Ramses does try to win the veto competition, and Paul, who does win the veto, notices that Ramses tried in the competition due to the time that Ramses performed in the competition. Essentially, it's the same dilemma that Tiffany was in during this time last season as well, as she was also the third nominee, and there was a backdoor plan in place. Cody and Jessica know that he is done, and Paul is going to take it throughout the season. Ramses tries to do damage control with Paul, and while the latter is saying that it's cool, Paul doesn't trust Ramses and never knows what he is going to do. Josh decides to attack Cody at the veto ceremony for absolutely no reason, as he is a liar about so many things, and Cody tells Josh that he needs to change his diapers. Josh calls Cody a meatball, which Josh tries to make that catchphrase happen the entire season, and it never catches on, and says Jessica is going to do his dirty work, where Jessica tells Josh that he needs to stop stumbling if he's going to give a speech, which I most definitely agree with, and he tells her to make some friends. Paul takes Josh off the block and nominates Cody as the replacement nominee. Cody and Josh continue going at it after the ceremony, and it's so cringeworthy, where Jessica tells him to shut the hell up, which I most definitely agree with, and she calls him a pawn that everyone is using, which is Josh's entire reality TV career. Christmas has to get a major surgery on her foot, and she has to decide whether she wants to stay in the house to recover from the surgery, or if she leaves the game, and of course she decides to stay in the house, though she casts her eviction vote in the hospital. Cody decides to hop off in the middle of the announcement, and Jessica decides to speak to Christmas about them trying to make amends. Christmas is told that Jessica knew nothing about her being nominated, and Jessica doesn't understand where things changed, where Christmas turned into a mean girl, which is just a victimization tactic on Jessica's part, in my opinion. The conversation is very awkward, and mentions that she felt attacked by Jessica, also saying that she nor Cody went up to her when she returned from breaking her foot, though Jessica mentions that she was the first person that saw Christmas, and the flashbacks prove this. Christmas tells Jessica that she has a lot of time to mend relationships, but it will be hard for her to overcome what has happened. Jessica breaks down over everything that is happening this week, and Cody decides to apologize to Christmas, since he wants to make things easier for Jessica. He also throws Mark and Dominic under the bus for mentioning him to target Christmas, and I don't remember if this actually happened or not. And Christmas somewhat believes this, since Dominic is distant with everyone, which is not a good sign on Dominic's end, and Mark continues to be distant with her. Dominic decides to host a show, and it's also Dominic's birthday, though Dominic hosted the show because she did this show in hopes to get a talk show. She interviews people, and it ends up with her interviewing Cody about organically formed teams, which rubbed people the wrong way with the way she said that, and Cody mentions that he only cared about targeting Paul. Paul asks him if Cody made the decision on his own, and Cody said that there are 1 to 2 people who always knew about his decision. Mark gets extremely defensive about who Cody is talking about, and they go at it, which makes Mark look very guilty. The herd also talks about Dominic's comment, and Paul mentions that Dominic might end up getting evicted sooner than later, while Paul wants to cause more divide in the initial group. Honestly, I think Paul overestimated Dominic's ability, as Dominic wasn't doing this for game information, but just because Dominic was trying to get a talk show. Cody is evicted in a 7-3-0 vote, and we learn that Paul organized the split vote. While Cody made for a great source of drama, and he had refreshing diary rooms since he was so honest and blunt, Cody in general was just very vile during his short stay in the house at this point, as he made a lot of transphobic comments, he made a lot of people feel uncomfortable, and despite him whining about the victim noises, Cody in general just victimized himself and Jessica. But as we all know, this will not be the end of Cody's journey in the season, so there'll be much more to discuss later. Week 3 on paper should be a very interesting week, as the people who are not in the majority alliance win HOH and are in power, and they take a shot at the people who are supposedly in the majority alliance, while the main underdog ends up escaping being evicted. But it doesn't end up being a good week for a variety of reasons. One, the main structure of the house that is stabilized in this week really takes form throughout the rest of the season, and the toxicity really kicks it up a notch. And it's even worse because the victim of this toxicity is an innocent victim, and it's very unwarranted, and they would continue this throughout the entire season, and just didn't like how it was handled. And we really saw how brainless most of the cast were when it came to gameplay, and why they didn't even doubt things, like, why are we turning on this ally so soon when they didn't even do anything? There were no questions, and they just followed whatever Paul, the master, wanted. So, Elena still wants Jessica out this week, and is loyal to Dominique. Remember this. Paul knows that Paul's immunity runs out after this week, so Paul needs to create new targets, and is using Cody telling Paul that Mark and Dominic knew about targeting Paul as an excuse to switch targets. Alex wins HOH after Elena makes a deal with her, since they were the final 2 in the endurance competition. Paul is happy that Alex won, since Paul's been trying to work her over the last week, and Jason realizes that he can use Jessica as a number, where he mentions that he wants Matt, and this never changes, or Dominique out. And it's interesting that Jason has this inclination to use Jessica to his benefit, though it's unfortunate that he doesn't keep up with this throughout the season. Jason and Kevin talk about how Alex a deal with Elena to not put the latter's friend up, and she mentions that she's nominating someone with Jessica, which Jason is not thrilled with. Mark asks Alex if he's going up, and she mentions that if Elena says so, then yes, which isn't a reassuring answer. Alex mentions that she is working with the collective, and they have to work with the collective, which is really just a cult, so Jessica has to go up, or she and Jason will go home, which is just a stupid mentality to have. Paul knows that Alex isn't going to nominate Jason or Ramses, Jessica is a non-factor, and Josh trusts Paul, so the target has to be in the big alliance. So Paul tells Alex about Dominic and Mark, and also tells them about what Cody told him/them. Elena speaks to Alex about Matt, Raven, herself, Mark, Dominique, and Paul being protected, though Alex tells her that she wants to nominate Dominique and Mark. Paul tells Alex that Mark and Dominique are up to something, and Dominique needs to go because she is using her talk show to get more strategic game from people. Isn't true from what I've already previously discussed, and sees her as a better competitor than Mark. We waste a scene of Ramsey's and Kevin's parental friendship, and we have a scene of Raven talking about her pacemaker, since her stomach is essentially paralyzed due to her having gastroparesis. Christmas returns to the house, and she tells them how detrimental her foot was broken, and she starts crying, since things will never be the same again, since she will get arthritis in a few years, and then she will have to get another surgery, so she can't compete in her prior CrossFit career anymore. Mark makes his pitch to Alex, and mentions that he will keep Alex and Jason safe if he wins power. Dominique speaks to Alex, since she knows that something is wrong, and she says that she has been sensing someone is trying to get herself and Mark out, and she's throwing Elena under the bus, since she thinks that Elena is threatened by Mark and Dominique's friendship. This was most definitely a thing that was on the feed, and a lot of people suspect that Dominique had an unrequited crush on Mark, so this might have been a motivating factor for why she felt this way about Elena, though it's really unfounded and was a really bad move on Dominique's part. Alex nominates Dominique and Jessica for eviction. Dominique knows that some people on her side were behind the move, and when Paul tries speaking to Dominique, it's very awkward. Mark speaks to her as she's trying to calm down, and she mentions that Paul and Elena knew about this, since they distanced from her 3 days ago. Mark starts crying in the diary room about this, and he tells her that he will do his best to keep her in the house. They give Dominique the obnoxious religious person edit a la Jimika and Ali, and I really do not like it. But God spoke to her about how Paul knew about this. Paul speaks to Dominique, and she mentions that one person in the group wants her out, where Paul can tell that she is talking about Paul, and she starts asking a bunch of questions to him/them. Paul is going to have to play more strategic and cutthroat this season, since playing with quote-unquote friendship last season caused a lot of people to backstab Paul. Kevin, Alex, and Jason speak about what they need to do with the veto, and Jason wants to take Jessica off the block so Raven can be the pawn against Dominique, but both of them immediately reject it. Jason wins the veto, and Paul has a plot to have Jessica vetoed to have Mark up beside her. Alex is told of this plan, since Mark is the one vouching for Dominique, and Paul tells Jason that Alex has a plan, which is what Paul told Alex about earlier, so he's essentially orchestrating this conversation to make them think that they were the ones who came up with it. Jason and Alex speak, while Paul tells them that Mark has to know about it beforehand, so they bring Mark into the room, who is not pleased with being a pawn. Dominique speaks to Jason to make her pitch to him, and she speaks in code about who the snake is, especially with the enemy conveniently getting close to him and Alex now. Jason reports this conversation back and mentions that the snake is in the room, and Elena is currently in the room when this conversation is happening. Dominique speaks to Alex about the snake, who is the tempter, and snake slithers in the environment that they are familiar with, and she names Paul to Alex. Alex does what she does best and tells her master Paul that she referred to him/them as a snake, and Paul is pissed off, who slithers to Dominique's room, literally, and asks if she wants Paul to hiss, but they go back in the HOH room, where Dominique states that Paul has snake tendencies, and Paul questions her about him so-called being the snake, and asks if he was the one putting the target on her, while Paul tells her to stop making implications, where she says that she can do whatever she wants, and Paul doesn't know her to come at her like that. Dominique mentions being a target for something she did not do, and a tempter mentions it, where she warns the other Huskies about this, while they come for them, where she points to Mark and Lena, which literally happens the very next week. Dominique mentions that God has her back, and gets annoyed that God is brought up, where Dominique mentions that Paul is going home sooner than later, which unfortunately doesn't happen, and Paul mentions that it's interesting coming from someone who is on the block. Mark mentions that he does not want to go on the block, and tells him that he will evict Dominique. There was a plan to have Paul dressed in brown, or blackface essentially, to look like a snake, like akin to blackface, and for him to dress in black, but production shot that down. And Jason mentions to Alex that Raven should go up as a pawn, but she is not convinced. Jason does not use the veto. There is some tension after the ceremony, as Elena was told about Dominique throwing her under the bus at some point, though they never put it in the episode. And Dominique throwing Paul and Elena under the bus in her speech didn't help. Dominique warns them that they will do it to her, and Elena mentions to others that Dominique will watch the episodes on Friday, that she never did anything to her, which is true. Dominique overhears the conversation and gives her the opportunity to say to her face, which of course Elena doesn't do. Dominique mentions that people did not give their concerns to her all week, and Paul mentions that he/they did. Jessica is trying to repair her relationships, so she's trying to get into Raven and Elena's good graces, but Raven does not like or trust Jessica, though she definitely should have at this point. We get a fight between Mark and Josh over a pool game, where Josh ends up scratching on the pool game, but he forgets about it. Mark loses his mind over it, and Josh denies it, so Mark gets a drink and throws it in Josh's face as a part of the punishment. Josh is really pissed off, so he gets condiment and throws it all over Mark. Apparently it was hot sauce that Mark threw in Josh's eye, and the latter is really pissed off now, which has Mark really pissed off as well. Josh sees it as so disrespectful, and they end up arguing once again, where the entire house gathers in the backyard by the pool. Dominique comforts Josh, and Mark apologizes to Josh, where Josh brings up Mark trying to get Paul and Christmas out, which didn't happen, but that's the word on the street at this point. Josh is calling Mark all types of liars. Paul jabs at Dominique for some reason, and Jessica decides to interest herself in this, since Josh claims that he was so loyal and not a liar, where she brings up him lying about his votes in the first week. Josh and Jessica argue once again, since she claims that he threw Christmas under the bus, but he is not this loyal person he claims to be, and he mentions that she was campaigning against Christmas and is trying and failing to reintegrate herself into the house. What they didn't show is there was another argument between Dominique and Christmas, where the latter really treats Dominique poorly for no reason, and it's a sign of the nastier side of Christmas that we will see on her 2 seasons. Jessica wins the final temptation, which is the halting hex, which can cancel an eviction. Josh decides to pick a fight with Jessica at the eviction for no reason, telling her that he's going to target her next week, and Dominique is evicted in a unanimous 10-0 vote. I don't know if Dominique has potential or had potential as a player in the season or Big Brother in general, or if she was just very bad. But I didn't like how she was treated. She was in a good position for the first few weeks, and Paul deciding to create Paul's own structure since the majority structure was created by Cody, and Dominique making some errors caused her to be flipped on. As a character, we really didn't see much of her until her eviction week. And from what they did give her, they gave her the traditional black person who's extremely religious edit, so it wasn't the most fun. I wish she did better in the season, but she really isn't notable on her own in the grand scheme of things. But luckily she got out of the toxic house quickly. Week 4 had the makings of a great week. Cody returning to the house and being able to dominate with Jessica, her winning the HOH where everyone was against her and Cody, and winning the veto, and she seemingly had the game sense to know what to do, but it all just fell completely apart as the complete opposite happened. And not only did the power flip not happen, but the most expendable person in the house that wasn't even in the alliance and someone that they should have worked with ended up going home, and the entire week was just very boring. In addition to that, after this week, it was clear that the season was going to be a cringe, boring, toxic fest for the rest of the season, and there's no hope in its changing. Cody returns to the house, and of course everyone but Jessica is annoyed with it. She tells him that America gave her a power to halt evictions for the next 3 weeks, and she was on the block last week, and Kevin as well as Jason protected her last week. They plan to target Christmas, Paul, Josh, and Alex, and they all predict that Cody is going to be on his best behavior, which is true. Paul has a plan for Josh to taunt Cody and Jessica, which even Josh doesn't want to do. But he does what his master says. Josh decides to taunt Jessica and Cody during the entire HOH competition, and everyone gives their punishments to the couple, which doesn't deter them. It's also the anniversary of her father's death, and some of them knew about it, so this really ticked her off even more. Josh is yelling in his DRs, and even his DRs are so painfully scripted. I don't remember him talking like this in the challenge, which I'm rewatching as well, so it's even more startling. Anyways, Paul tells Elena to tell Josh to tell Christmas and Ramses to not take the deal, since Paul can't do it himself, I guess. Anyways, Jessica wins the HOH, and it's the anniversary of her father's death, like I mentioned earlier, so she's very emotional and thrilled at the same time. Everyone realizes that Josh is a huge target due to his antics, and Jessica tells Christmas that she isn't targeting her, so she is going to honor their deal. Josh knows that he is going on the block, and Christmas gives him advice, where Josh goes on to pitch his case, but Jessica sends Cody to get rid of Josh. Matt and Raven decide to kiss their asses and give Jody what they want to hear. If they were smart players, they would have actually worked on their relationships with them, which would have been advantageous for Matt and Raven. But they're adults, so this doesn't happen. Jessica kisses butt to two of the other Shementas, where Mark and Elena are seemingly more receptive to it, though there's still some distrust. But this would be the start of their decline. Cody and Jessica talk about how they do not trust Mark whatsoever, and this game in general is just very weird. Paul makes Paul's case to Cody, who tells Paul that he isn't going to target Paul anymore, though it is BS on both of their parts. Jessica doesn't know what to do with the nominations, and while Josh is obvious, the other nominee is a question mark. Jessica knows that they don't have the numbers, and it will be impossible to get rid of Paul, but Ramses will be an easy pawn because he has no one, which is exactly why he shouldn't be a pawn, because nominating a pawn that has no one, especially when you're trying to take a shot at the majority alliance, causes for the pawn to go home. Jessica nominates Ramses and Josh for eviction. Ramses feels fine that Josh is a bigger target than him, and Josh ends up crying because Jessica mentions that he doesn't deserve to be in the house, but Christmas consoles him. Jessica asks Elena if she's going to be shocked by the votes this week, and Elena tells her that Josh will go home, and that's because Elena doesn't know either, and she asks Paul, who gives Jessica the answer that she wants. Paul tells Jason and Alex that they are going to keep Josh in their house, and Alex makes fun of Jessica's shitty nominations. There was actually a point where the house wanted to get rid of Josh, just to have an easy week, but, of course, the Master Paul told them not to. As well as Christmas, since she was heavily campaigning as well on the feeds. Paul tells Josh that he is going to stay, but he needs to lay low this week. Christmas tells her story about being the first female pit crew member, and Cody is very wowed by it, so it's nice to see them have a normal conversation, though Cody is claiming that it's just for game, so I don't really buy it. Jessica apologizes to Ramses for using him as a pawn, and Josh hopes for Jason to throw the veto to him. Jessica ends up winning the veto, and Paul tells Josh to play dead, so Jessica won't be suspicious enough to cause her to use the veto on Ramses. Paul tells Matt and Raven that Ramses goes with the power, and are given their instructions to vote out Ramses, though Ramses enters the conversations, which they blatantly lie to him about their conversation. Ramses speaks to Jessica, but Ramses mentions that he got 2 votes last time he was on the block, and no one knows who they are. But he does not trust the house to vote how they should vote, which, good! Jessica asks Raven about the votes, since Ramses is worried, though Jessica knows that Raven is lying. Jessica speaks to Cody about potentially using the veto, and doesn't feel good about the vote, since she's expecting Ramses to be evicted, but Cody convinces her to not use the veto, but Jessica literally predicts what will happen in 4 days. She mentions that she will put up Alex as a replacement nominee, and he pretty much talks her off her rightful paranoia. And this is the thing with Cody. He wants to work with the people that doesn't want to work with him, but he ignores the people who would be valuable numbers for him. And Jessica not going with her guts also just shows a bad sign of a bad player. Jessica decides to not use the veto. So Paul is planning on leaving Mark and Elena out of the vote, since he fears them getting too close to Jessica and Cody again. Mark assures Jessica that the votes are there to boot Josh, but Paul doesn't like how Elena have been glued to Jody all week, where we have comments from Mark and Jessica about it as well. Mark tells Cody that he wants to regroup with them moving forward, but Cody does not trust Mark at all. Mark tells Paul that he has a clean slate with Cody. Why the fuck would he tell Paul this? There's no advantageous reason to do this. And mentions that he doesn't like a pair that is playing neutral and doesn't stir the pot. And Mark is clearly talking about Matt and Raven, which Mark outright states to Cody in an earlier conversation as well. Or it might have been a later conversation, but you get the point. Paul, of course, reports this all to Matt and Raven, and the relationship between the two pairs are done, though they definitely needed and need one another in this game. But it shows the idiocy of Matt and Raven, where they don't even attempt to clear this up. Cody speaks to Ramses, who mentions that people want to fuck with him and Jessica, but Cody is mentioning that there will be blood in the house if Josh isn't unanimously voted out. Well, Kevin asks Jessica if she won the temptation, and she says that she does, but her and Cody won't go anywhere. I don't know why she told Kevin this, despite having some trust in him, and Kevin tells Jessica that they're going to flip the house to boot Ramses, as some good faith. Jessica rants to Cody about it, since she knew that this was going to happen, and she feels that it's Paul, so there's a good chance that Ramses goes, where she only thinks Cody and Elena will vote correctly, so she doesn't even trust Mark to vote with them. Jessica and Cody does a last-minute campaign, but as we know, votes are usually determined way before Wednesday evening, but Jason doesn't appreciate Cody's threatening tone. Josh decides to taunt Mark with pots and pans the morning of the eviction, and he's trying to be an evil dick. Ramses is evicted in a 7-3 vote. Like, what is there to say about Ramses? As a character, he was nondescript as he was very quiet, he wasn't an interesting personality, he wasn't funny or witty, and while I know that he was trying to lay low, he wasn't building relationships with people, and people sketched out by him, so his under the radar strategy didn't even work for him. And as a player, he just didn't get to do anything. So I think a lot of it was just his inability to really socialize with all the house guests. Though he was getting closer to Alina and Mark, from what I remember on the feeds during this last week or two, so that was one of the reasons why he went as well. In general, he was just way too expendable and way too under the radar, and really is arguably the most forgettable person on the season. Week 5 is arguably the most toxic and one of the worst weeks in Big Brother history. There's so much drama, but not in a good way. It's a lot of toxic arguments between the showmances. We have a lot of ganging up on people that happened, orchestrated fights, and it's even worse because it's all based on the fact that no one is going home this week. And the drama is based on the fact that no one's going home, and people trying to incite something that would cause someone to go home. And everything's just at this uncomfortable standstill. That's really unfortunate to watch. And this was already after the point where the season had no hope whatsoever. Paul ends up winning the HOH, and at the end of the live show, Jessica reveals that the final temptation will keep herself and Cody safe for the next few weeks. Due to Jessica taking the final temptation, there is now the temptation competition for the next few weeks, as the person who gets last in the competition will be the third nominee. Paul and the entire house are thrown off with this, and Paul thinks her comment was unnecessary, since she doesn't know that Cody and herself would go up, though she was honest about this, and it was true. And they argue about how she thought people were going to be honest, but that isn't the case. Elena and Mark know that they are on the outs, and Jessica is hopeful that she can scare Paul from nominating them, though Paul mentions that the opposite is going to happen, since Paul wants to flush the twist. Mark notices that there's tension between himself and Elena, and asks Matt if they're still good, where they, Cody is also in the room, confront Matt, who skirts around it, of course. Cody speaks to Paul, and he is campaigning to keep Mark safe, stating that Mark told him that he wants Mark, Elena, and Paul to work together, which only makes Mark a secondary target for Paul. Since Cody defending Paul is a clear signal that they're working together, which is the opposite of what Cody did when he was on his way out of the house. Paul tells Alex that no one thinks that they are aligned, but if Jessica and Cody are safe, Mark and Elena go up and Mark will go, since he wants to make moves and Elena wants to play it safe. Paul throws Mark under the bus to Elena and is trying to get her to move away from Mark, as she wants to distance herself from him. Mark and Elena speak about Cody and Jessica wanting to work with them, but she mentions that three people aren't going to keep them in the game, and they end up arguing, as she says that he's spending way too much time with Cody, and despite her liking them, their actions in the game is not a good look for Mark and herself. I believe Elena is still good friends with Cody and Jessica to this date, where I don't know if that's the case with Mark, since he broke up with Elena. But it just shows that Elena's main strategy was to kiss up to the majority, but at this point, the majority already shut her out, so there's nothing she can really do. The temptation competition is told to the house, and while Cody and Mark want to compete, Jessica and Elena don't, since they want people to think that they're not worried. Paul tells Matt to compete, and while he doesn't want to, he does what his master says. Mark gains immunity from the comp, and Jason is the third nominee. Cody tells Mark that Paul threw a fit at his time when Mark won, and Jessica tells him that the entire house is after the four of them, which is definitely true. Jessica makes her pitch to Paul, and they talk about the temptation hex, where the conversation is pointless since she's being very vague. Paul plans on there being a pawn against Elena if Cody and Jessica can't go up, where Matt and Alex end up volunteering. Paul nominates Cody and Jessica for eviction. Jessica and Cody are annoyed, and they are tired of everyone trying to console them when everyone knew what they were doing and what was going to happen. Paul is spoken to by the couples in the HOH room, where it ends up being a confrontation, since Jessica tells him that what he did caused him to waste his HOH with the power she has. She tells Cody to not speak, but this doesn't work, since Cody and Paul end up going at it, since he insults Paul's ability in the game, and Paul doesn't like that Cody is getting heated. Cody does not like that Paul is telling Jessica to shut up, and he's not going to put up with it and to let him treat her like a dog. Paul tells Cody to leave his room, and they continue arguing as they leave the room. Jessica is now pissed off at Cody for his actions, as she tells him that it is a game where he escalated it. Though honestly, she's very hypocritical, because Jessica has and will continue to act just as aggressively in arguments with other people throughout the house and the season. He mentions that they don't care, and he doesn't care, and they end up arguing about being in the same position again, where she doesn't want to deal with him being a hothead in the real world. Josh and Mark end up getting into it, since Josh is annoyed with Cody's attitude and is venting about it, and his mouth, but Mark decides to defend Cody, which pisses Josh off because he didn't have Dominique's back when she was minding her business, and he yells that Mark is a joke. And honestly, Josh isn't lying about Mark, and I do feel like he handled the Dominique situation very cowardly on the feet. Josh calls Mark a bland joke and is tired of his faces, and when Josh smacks the pots and walks towards Mark with the pots and pans being smashed, Mark in his tutu snatches it from his hand and is literally about to hit Josh, where they have to be separated by production. Cody has to console Mark, who's triggered from being bullied as a child, but that stopped once he started working out. They both rant about their issues with their instruments, and Jessica tells Paul the power, where she has to use it now, where she didn't want to use it initially, which is why they were nervous. Paul speaks to Elena, and the entire house is told that if she uses it, the week will be a dud, where they are going to get Jessica to not use the hex by mentioning that Cody is ruining her game. Christmas speaks to Jessica and mentions that she would have been under the radar if Cody was not in the house, and Christmas is trying to get Jessica to not use the hex. We get another fight between Cody and Jessica, and I don't even care to recap it, since it's one of the many fights that happened this week, even though he's trying to be apologetic in this discussion, though it seems like he's saying that he's going to disappoint her in life. Elena also mentions to Jessica that sending Cody home would be the best for the both of them, and they end up ranting about the Charmantes. Paul wins the veto, and it was the same competition that Paul won last season, with it being the news reporter in a raining thunderstorm. And he has a conversation with her about Cody speaking to Matt about how he wanted to align with Alex and Jason so they could take out Jessica, Elena, and Raymond for them. Jessica mentions that if they want Cody out of the house, Alex needs to go next week. Jessica speaks to Matt about whatever Cody spoke to him about in the first week, and Matt mentions that it isn't important anymore since it's 5 weeks later. And honestly, kind of props to Matt for doing this. He could have easily used this opportunity to be messy, but he didn't even go that route. Jessica approaches Cody with it, and he completely denies it, though the flashbacks say otherwise. He is really pissed off and storms off, where he tells her that she lost him, so outside of their many fights this week, he is the one that might be done with her at this point. Paul tells everyone about the plan, but he keeps it from Mark and Elena that they have no intention on actually sending Alex home. They tell Jessica that they agree to her deal, and Jessica mentions that she wants 2 weeks of not being on the block. Paul uses the veto on Jason, leaving Cody and Jessica on the block. Jason, Raven, and Kevin are talking about Jessica being nominated, and she overhears the conversation about them switching the conversation when she appears in the room, where they want her to stab Cody in the back. Raven is denying everything and grabs Jessica, literally, to clear things up, but Jessica does not like her arm being held, since it looks really bad on Raven's end. Raven speaks to the both of them, and Cody asks Raven why she is so against him in the house, where she mentions that the entire house is against him, and he is tired of the personal attacks. Jessica is annoyed with that, and Jason's veto speech, so whatever deal is done, where Raven reports everything to Paul and the cult. Paul speaks to Jessica about what has happened, and she tells him about how he is playing a psychological game due to his veteran status, and she tells him that she is going to use the temptation. Paul tells the cult that they need to ramp it up, so he tells Josh to turn it up with the pans, where Jessica is literally throwing apples at Josh, and he tells Alex about how the deal was about Jessica getting them to send Alex home. So the entire house attacks Jessica, where Alex asks Jessica why her, and Jessica mentions that she nominated her. Alex brings up the cat ears being stolen in the first week, and Jessica denies it, where she apparently threw Raven under the bus for them. I don't know. Raven and Jessica argue about the cat situation and calls Jessica a bitch for turning on her for throwing her under the bus. Josh decides to rant at the couple when they are in the backyard, with Raven and Paul chanting, with Alex and Christmas making their commentary too. They were intending on triggering Cody's PTSD to get him to hit Josh so he could be expelled, and Matt had to actually be the rational one in the situation. Jessica uses the halting hex, and the eviction is cancelled. Week 6 is somewhat better than the last few weeks, because it's finally the end of the Cody and Jessica saga, and I really wanted the house to move on. And there are also some hints that some of these players were playing individually, but it was of course squashed. So Josh wins the HOH, and we learn that he made up with Mark a few days prior. Elena asks Josh if he's going to nominate her, and he doesn't give her much of an answer. Cody and Jessica know that their ass is grass, and they heard talk about how Mark and Elena are not happy with the HOH results. And Alex says this when Mark is in the room. And she has to somewhat backtrack, where Mark catches her off guard. They have a very awkward conversation, and she calls him out for wanting Cody and Jessica to win. And she calls him out for being a flip-flopper, which Mark admits in the diary room. Christmas would prefer for Mark and Elena to be nominated, and Josh wants that too, but Paul is, of course, still pushing Jessica and Cody. Elena speaks to Josh and mentions that she was told by the entire house that they were voting her out, and then the house set her up to vote him out, but he isn't buying it. Christmas tells Josh to be nice to Jessica and Cody, and after Paul leaves, she tells Josh to not do everything that Paul says. Josh pretty much outlines Elena's game to Christmas, and they both clock how close Elena is to Paul, and Christmas knows that every HOH but Jessica and Cody's was Paul's, but this week isn't going to be that. Everyone but Josh and Christmas, I believe, play in the temptation competition. Jessica throws it so she can be in the veto competition, as she is the third nominee. And Cody ends up winning immunity. The entire house knows that Jessica threw the competition, and Marlena know that they are in trouble and will be the nominees. After speaking to Josh, Paul gives Elena advice on what to say to Josh, who wants to use her as a pawn, and Elena mentions that Alex and Paul have performed better than her, so she is not on the block because she is not the best competitor. The two of them get into it as she starts panicking, tries backtracking on what she said when Paul's in the room, and he shuts her down by outright stating that she's going on the block, as they are literally yelling at each other in a fun confrontation and in a fun way. Josh nominates Mark and Elena for eviction and decides to use his speech as a smokescreen, where he attacks Jessica to hide his real intentions, which is a really dumb move. Josh attempts to speak to Cody and Jessica, and they shut it down. He is trying to tell them that she is not the target this week, but Jessica is still reeling about the speech, and she will take several more speeches, and they continue fighting with him. This is horrible on all their ends. Josh should have told them this before the speech, that they weren't the targets, and the speech was a dumb move, and Jessica should have listened to what Josh was trying to say, but was too emotional to see the bigger picture, and the same thing with Cody. And it's just a prime example of why the two of them aren't good players. Josh tells the herd that he wants Elena out first, but Paul shuts it down. Paul speaks to Christmas to get her to use the ring of replacement to make sure that Cody does not play, and it's 5-1, but Christmas thinks that it's a bit too early. She tells Josh about the Ring of Temptation and will do whatever he wants with it. Josh doesn't want to use, but all this ends up being for naught, as Paul mentions that Jody would vote against Josh in the jury. And with the final results, I actually doubt this. And they are useless separately, but strung together. Since Christmas ends up using it when Cody is picked to play in the veto, so Paul got his/their way. Cody cries in Jessica's arms. Jessica is livid that Christmas did that to Cody, and the two get into it. As Christmas is trying to mention that it's not personal, but Jessica rambles on about not liking the two-facedness and still taking it personally, where Christmas literally wheels out of the conversation mid-conversation, and they add the squeaky sounds to it, which makes it very funny. Mark wins the veto, and Jody knows that it is over for her in this game, as she feels like there's nothing for her to do. Matt volunteers to go on the block. He does this several times in the season. He volunteered a few times beforehand and will do so a few times afterwards. And Raven is also willing to go on the block. But Josh nominates Raven as the replacement nominee when Mark vetoes himself off the block. Kevin tells Jessica that he's planning on having Cody align with him to split up the other two showrunners, and Kevin does this a lot in the season, where he suggests ideas that could be good for him, but it always ends up being all talk, and he never executes it well. Cody is told of the deal by Jessica that Kevin wants to speak to him about joining Alex, Jason, and Paul, but he is not into it whatsoever. Kevin tells this to Jason and Alex, but they are not interested, and he tells Paul this, who is not into this at all. Kevin and Jason speak to Cody about targeting the other couples, and he gives them what Kevin wants, but he sees the deal as null and void. Jason ends up spilling what Kevin did to Paul, since it was not a team move, and they realize that Kevin is shady. This was a really horrible move on Jason's part, and we consistently see him building his own ideas, and he's starting to get some of the instincts on how to really thrive in the game, but he always either talks himself out of it or lets others talk him out of it, and it's just a really bad characteristic for the game. We get into the final fight of Jody and Josh, where Jessica decides to be condescending and rude as hell by asking Josh to spell drought, and when he does it correctly, she says that she can trick him on a bunch of other words. It's just really unnecessary. Paul tells Josh to ask Jessica to spell evicted, and when he does this, Cody and Jessica decide to go in on him about being a piece of shit, being fat, a moron, and the dumbest person ever. Josh doesn't get why they're making it personal, and Jessica says that today isn't the day, though she was the one who started it with him. Cody mentions that it isn't a game to him. Josh age shames Cody, and they all go at it about how Cody and Jessica doesn't know shit about anyone, and Josh and Jessica end up slamming stuff on the table as they are arguing, and he mentions how her airtime is done. She mentions that she doesn't care about going home, and she's thrilled about it, and she mentions that she nominated herself, and he claims that he got her out of the house, though she says that he nominated herself, so he didn't get her out. Josh does what Josh does best, cries after starting or getting into an argument, but then lets his master pump him up and put the battery in his back, where the three of them continue arguing again. Josh decides to go pot and pant and goes in the backyard to rant about Jessica screwing her game over for the latter, who ends up picking something up but drops it before he gets into Josh's face, and of course Josh backs the fuck back, and they are separated. Pretty much, Josh and Kevin give up on the couple, and Jessica is evicted in a 7-1 vote. I know a lot of people mentioned that Jessica had a lot of promise as a player, and while I think she had some promise, I don't think she had a whole lot of promise. Not following your gut is a really, really, really bad move, which she did on her HOH. She didn't know how to balance Cody and her other allies, and she completely dumped everyone else for Cody. And she got very spiteful, personal, whiny, victim-y, and got way too tunnel visioned at times, where it caused her to avoid seeing the bigger picture and executing it. And at the same time, I just remember a lot of the house guests not liking her even before Cody made his move. At the same time, she's definitely one of the bigger personalities in the season, brought a lot of drama throughout the season, and I could see why some think she's a badass, but she just never lived up to it. And at the same time, I kind of found her to be very unlikable at various points in the season as well, so she annoyed the heck out of me too. Overall, she benefited from the other house guests being sheep and being a lot more unlikable than she is, but it doesn't make Jessica likable herself. Week 7 is the same old, same old. The gang up targets end up being Marlena, mainly for the week, as Cody kind of secludes himself, though there are definitely some fights with Cody that they didn't really show on the edit. People playing for Paul are not in their best interest, and the structure just knocking off the bottom runners, since the structure and the hierarchy is so firm, nothing's really going to change. And I just want it to be sped up at this point. Alex wins HOH, and Mark is now on to Paul, as he agreed with Jessica's eviction speech calling Paul out, and Cody is clearly not handling being alone well. Raven is upset about losing the competition and wants to target Mark and Elena because they still speak to Cody and are flip-floppers. Raven shouldn't want them out because she and Matt are next after they all go. And Josh and Christmas are also talking about Mark and Elena being flip-floppers, where they are hoping that Mark and Elena do not get to Jason and Alex about aligning with them and Cody making it a 5. Alex mentions that she wants to nominate Matt and Elena as pawns to backdoor Cody, but Paul mentions that it could cause the Showmances and Cody to get back together, and Alex mentions that she always wanted the Showmances to go, though she tends to forget that she's in a very visible pair with Jason, and they would obviously be targeted after the Showmances are gone. Cody is talking to Kevin about how he would have never targeted Alex, but he knows that he is in trouble, where Kevin is being nice to him, hoping that this will be a benefit, but he washes hands of Cody in general after fighting with Josh last week. Alex sees Kevin speaking to Cody, and she reports it to the cult, so they all talk to Kevin about how he shouldn't speak to Cody. Mark and Jason are talking, and Mark mentions how a move needs to be made to take out Paul, since the game gets a lot easier from there. Alex now wants Mark and Elena to go on the block, but wants everyone to be in the temptation competition to make sure that Cody doesn't win it. And she's able to convince Matt to throw the competition to be the third nominee. And he does this because he wants to be seen as trustworthy. Cody also throws the competition so he can be the third nominee, but Matt beats him to it, so he's the third nominee and Mark wins immunity for the week. Alex now has to find a third nominee and is dabbling between Paul or Jason, since Elena is for sure a nominee. Elena is told by Cody that Kevin told him that he, meaning Kevin, Paul, Alex, and Jason are working together and are targeting Mark and Elena next, which really causes Elena to feel betrayed, since she spoke to Paul about the game more than anyone else. Elena speaks to Paul, who of course denies it, and says that Paul is why she is safe this week, but she doesn't buy it. Elena asks Cody if she picks him for the veto competition if he'll take her off the block, and he says yes. Christmas wheels across the room and sees Marlena speaking game to Cody, causing her to call Mark out in front of the entire house. Mark of course denies it and mentions that her observations was them talking game with Cody, and she tells Mark to stop putting her name in his mouth, while Mark mentions that it's clear that she's been the person who's been throwing his name out there for weeks now. She calls him a floater, and she yells out, Cody! 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 To get him out there. And she mentions that he won't come out because he is cool with Mark now, which is definitely true. Josh, of course, has to add his 2 cents, and Mark mentions that he should have voted her out the first week. She mentions that the numbers weren't there, and Mark insinuates that they were there, which is kind of true. Alex nominates Elena and Jason for eviction. Cody knows that he's getting backdoored, and Alex mentions that Elena needs to go if Cody remains safe, but she mentions that Matt and Raven need to go sooner as well. Paul organizes a 5% alliance with Christmas, Alex, Jason, and the other 2 of them, of course, where they do not trust Kevin at all. Cody tells Kevin that he has a daughter and to not tell anyone about it, but only Jessica knew about it, since Kevin was having a cry fest about missing his family. What they don't show is Kevin does end up telling people about it, and this was where Alex decides to fight with Cody about him supposedly eating her cereal and breaking up his daughter, which was just very unnecessary. Matt wins the veto despite getting 3rd in the competition, but because he's the Temptation nominee, he can't use it on himself since there'll be no replacement nominee, so no backdooring Cody. Alex made a promise with Elena for them to not curse one another with punishments, and Elena gives Alex the punishment she was given, as Elena doesn't take the veto, despite winning the actual competition, and gives Alex the punishment for money, as Cody advises her to do so, as he doesn't want the vote to change. Or the nominations to change, I mean. Alex is really pissed off and rants to Jason about how she wants Elena gone now. She rants to Josh about wanting Jason off the block and for Elena to go, where Josh agrees with everything said about Elena as a player. Cody reassures Elena that she did the right thing, since she's a huge target anyways, and Cody is hoping that this will save him. Cody makes his pitch to Alex, who mentions that the house will go after her if she doesn't send him home, and campaigns to Alex and Jason about how the 2 of them are going to be targeted because they are the biggest threat of the house, which does end up happening because they're getting competitions. Matt is told by his master Paul to pull Jason off the block, which he does, and Cody is named the replacement nominee. And it's so ridiculous that someone who's on the block and wins the veto uses it on someone, and it's not like he has a pre-established long-meaning title like Dick did with Danielle in BB8 or Brennan did with Rachel in BB13. Josh tells Cody that he wasn't gunning for Jessica last week and how he wanted and still wants Mark and Elena out. Josh asks Cody in front of the cult about if he was working with Elena and Mark the second time, which he denies, which is a lie. Elena and Josh argue about the conversation in the H room last week, Elena voting him out, and them latching onto Jody when Jessica won H. Elena is screaming because Josh won't let her talk, and she's really losing her shit, which is really funny, as he's giving her heartburn! Josh brings up the $5,000, which sets Alex off, since she calls Elena out for making a promise and backing out of it, though Elena is not justifying it well. Cody is evicted in a unanimous 7-0 vote. Cody's antics, behavior, and personality really didn't change once he came back into the house, and despite him laying low initially, he still got into several fights with people when he returned, and he became his old self. But the only difference is that the cult was so united in a way that was so advantageous to him and anyone he was aligned with, and they were obsessed with kind of picking on Cody and Jessica, so it made him look like an underdog. And the cult didn't realize that the more you talk and obsess and target someone, the more liked they become because of the underdog effect. Despite the drama that he brings, and despite being an interesting narrator, I can't say that I like Cody, and I think he ages worse as the years go by. And on most other seasons, he would most definitely be very hated and the villain of the season. It is a double eviction, and Jason wins HOH, where he nominates Mark and Elena. During this nomination, Jason rats out Mark for planning to take out Paul pertaining to the conversation earlier in the week. And I really don't know why Jason felt the need to do this, since that would have been someone who would have been in his back pocket, which would have put him in a better position. But Jason clearly lacks the foresight. Mark ends up winning the veto and takes himself off the block, where Matt is named the replacement nominee. Josh and Kevin were contemplating with Paul to send Matt home, but it was shut down. Elena is evicted in a 6-1 vote. Elena was very frustrating to watch live, and even more frustrating to watch in this rewatch, since it was clear that she only cared about getting airtime because she thought it would give her more opportunities and it would cause her social media following to rise, though she didn't get a whole lot of airtime because she wasn't an interesting player. While I don't think she was one of the worst players, since she had some idea of how to play the game, she was just too passive and was too much of a follower, but she was booted early, so she didn't even benefit from being a follower. And I found her dynamic with Mark to be very cringeworthy to watch throughout the entire season. And obviously, her racist tweets being found and exposed right after the season ended obviously doesn't endear me to her either. Week 8 is a relatively boring and tepid week, and what was planned a month ago finally takes place here, with the two outsider showmanters being rid of here. Mark is not handling Elena's eviction and being on his own well, and Matt feels comfortable, despite the showmanters being a target throughout the last few weeks, though Alex is planning on sending them home after Mark. Paul decides to pick a fight with Mark in front of the house about the big move to take Paul out, and Mark pretty much shuts down while Paul is going at him for being a liar and denies throwing Mark under the bus, since Mark knows that nothing he says or do will help him at this point. Christmas ends up winning HOH as Paul blatantly tries to not blatantly throw it to her, but Christmas is talking about making a big move, which she doesn't make a big move. Alex is trying to build a target on Kevin due to his antics with Cody before Jessica left, and now she's stating to Christmas that Kevin is a cop. Kevin asks her to clear the air, but she continues to avoid him and has to nag Jason about needing to jump ship from Kevin, though he still trusts Kevin. Alex is annoyed that Jason is trying to play mediator, and the entire thing is annoying the hell out of me. Josh is believing the lie Cody mentioned about Alex and Jason trying to plot against them all, and then Jason kind of outing himself in a speech against Mark. And now Josh, seeing Mark and Jason being buddy-buddy, rubs him the wrong way. So this is increasing Jason's target. Jason is told in his HH letter that his wife is pregnant, and we have some development of Josh and Christmas's relationship over the season. Paul goes over their strategy of getting the 3 pairs to target one another and being the number 3 to all of these pairs, so he can be the number 1 person in the pair that remains, or the remaining person in that pair that remains. Something that Devon should have done last season and Danielle should have done in BB13. Christmas tells Paul that she wants to nominate 1 person in each pair, so Matt and Jason, so Mark can be backdoored, but she would be fine if Jason went home, and this works out for Paul, since Paul wants Alex and Raven to be reliant on Paul. There is another temptation twist, which is the Tree of Temptation. Christmas speaks to Maven about how one of them needs to be a pawn to backdoor Mark, but he volunteers to be a pawn again, where Christmas says something similar to Jason and Alex, but doesn't mention that Jason is her secondary target. Mark gives his pitch, but it's all for naught. Christmas nominates Jason and Matt for eviction. And because Mark chose a safe and ally apple, he chooses to save Paul. Christmas and Josh are somewhat bonding with Mark and talking about how they like him, where they will not mind if Jason goes home instead. Paul mentions that Alex should go before Jason and that Matt needs to go before Raven, where they are all discussing the final 5, which needs to be them, Kevin, and Raven. Jason has sketched out that Christmas picked Raven for the veto instead of Alex, which is a good read on his part, and Christmas even admitted that she effed up here. Jason ends up winning the veto, and Mark is for sure going up. Of course, he makes his last pitch in the house about how he will align with Josh and Christmas, and Josh states that he needs more, where Mark completely throws Alex and Jason under the bus, since they have Kevin and Paul, and sending Alex home now would be the best move for them. All of this is for naught, as when Jason takes himself off the block, Mark is named the replacement nominee. Matt and Raven are talking with Paul about who to target next, and Paul mentions that Jason needs to go first, and Paul speaks to Alex, where they talk about how Matt and Raven need to go next, and Alex talks about Matt being a liar, where she also Josh to be in the forum with them to end Jason. Paul has no intention of taking Alex to the end since he doesn't want to get sickened again. Alex and Jason talk about their pecking order, which is Mark, Matt, Kevin, Raven, Christmas, and Josh. And Paul reports to Christmas about how they and Josh are on no one's radar. Mark campaigns to Jason about how Matt and Raven are getting others to target them and how he wished he would have worked with them throughout the season. Kevin does not speak to Matt at all and finds him annoying, and Mark campaigns to Alex, who is not interested in buying whatever he is selling. Mark ends up speaking to Paul, but what they didn't show is that Paul picked a 3-hour fight with Mark the night before the eviction, and I do think this was one of the main reasons why Paul ends up losing. Mark is evicted in a 4-2 vote. Out of damn near everyone on the cast, I can genuinely say that Mark is a nice guy. And despite that, he got into a lot of drama in the season, though you can definitely tell a lot of it was people just provoking him, and he couldn't handle the toxicity in the house well. While he was one of the few who admitted to playing both sides or attempting to and being self-interested, there were times where he was just a bit too passive where he needed to be a lot more active, and he would have rode with Paul more if he wasn't tossed to the curb in the late pre-jury. Overall, I think he's one of the few on this season who would have the potential to do better if he was on another season. But when you think of Mark in general, he's not the most notable person. So week 9 is only somewhat decent because it's only the herd now and they have to turn on one another. But even the boot order from here on out has been telegraphed for about a month now. Paul, Alex, and Jason set up Kevin to make a rogue vote against Matt, but Alex blamed him and another cast member for it, and Matt is very suspicious about who are the 2 votes against him. Paul throws it, since it isn't in Paul's best interest to win it, and then we have Alex and Jason arguing about who's going to stay on the competition the longest, and they are making deals, which pisses Matt off, causing him to yell at them about their antics and the votes, and is building up a target between the 2 of them. Jason ends up winning the HOH competition. Raven and Matt are hoping that they are safe, but the last 4 boots who went home were in Shamensis, and Josh finds it odd that Kevin was trying to defend his vote, which Alex likes that Josh is falling for their plan. Kevin freaks out on Jason about the vote, and Jason tells him about the vote, or his vote at least, since Jason was one of the 2 votes that booted Matt. Maven, Josh, and Christmas are hoping that Kevin goes on the block since they think he was the rogue vote the entire season. We have a scene of Raven mumbling half of her words, and Alex speaks to Paul about how he needs to tell Maven that they are the pawns to backdoor Kevin, but the showmen are the actual targets this week, but they buy whatever Paul is saying. There's also this weird food fight that Matt and Raven have, which is just very ridiculous, and I think it built a bigger target on them since they wasted so much food. Alex tells Jason that no one but the 3 of them need to know about the votes, but he tells her that he already told Kevin, which causes Alex to lose her mind. Christmas and Paul talk about how much of a compulsive liar Raven is, and Josh asks Christmas if Paul was the rogue vote, since he's close with a lot of people, but she shuts it down. And this is the thing with Christmas. She's way too much of a team player where she doesn't even think about anything else outside of her point of view, when it would have been beneficial for her to consider all options. Jason tells Kevin that he is safe, but Kevin keeps on freaking out, which is not helping his case. Paul is ranting about Kevin when Raven comes up to speak to Jason, who is also ranting about Kevin. Jason nominates Matt and Raven for eviction. Jason tells Raven right after the nomination ceremony that she'll be pulled off the block with a veto, and she tells Paul what Jason told her, who is lying to her, and she tells Matt the same thing. Raven does predict that if they stay on the block and one of them goes home, one of Alex or Jason will follow them, which does end up happening. And Matt is insistent on taking Raven off the block. Alex is trying to push for Jason to send Kevin home, but that's one of his closest friends, and she's trying to paint Kevin as a bully and a mean person, which is something she knows Jason hates. Jason ends up winning the veto, and Paul is continuing the quote-unquote playing dumb strategy that Paul used both this and last season. Though Jason is being pushed by Jason and Paul to take Raven off the block, so he approaches Kevin about the idea, and of course he does not like it. Jason isn't going to put Kevin up, since that is his friend, and he barely spoke to Matt in 60-something days, which says a lot because they're in a cult together. So he tells Paul and Alex this, and he is getting paranoid about them planning to vote Kevin out, since they keep on giving one another looks. The others continue to push Jason to get Kevin nominated, and he sees through Alex riling Paul and Christmas up. Jason decides to not use the veto. Raven and Matt And to be honest, most of the house are livid at Jason's choice, and it doesn't help that Alex has Jason hide in the storage room for a while. Matt and Raven both yell at Jason for not telling them that he wasn't going to use the veto, where they would have understood it, and they're even more pissed off that he's hiding in the storage room. This is the first time Matt has a personality and bass in his voice, and Jason denies telling Raven that he was going to pull her off the block, though the flashbacks prove her correct. Matt calls Jason all types of bitches. Jason stumbles over his words several times during this argument, and Matt says that at least Cody had some balls, unlike him. Matt asks Jason and Kevin if they voted him out, and Kevin says that he voted out Mark, which he swears on his kids about. Jason ends up stuttering, so Matt knows that he was one of the votes, causing Matt to freak out even more, and Jason claims that Raven voted for Matt to stir the pot, but no one is owning the second vote, and of course Raven didn't vote Matt out, and she makes it very well known. Fight day continues, as Kevin tells Matt he did not vote against him, but Paul finds it odd that Kevin is now speaking to Matt, thinking that he's doing this to get jury votes. Paul reports this to the herd, and Josh wants to call out Kevin for doing this to every juror. Kevin asks Christmas about swimming, and she mentions that it was dumb for him to ask that since she has a broken foot. Josh ends up arguing with Kevin because he is standing up for Christmas, and he says that she asked him first. Kevin's saying it. He is tired of these lying folks, and tells Josh that he should be tired of letting others set him up, which is definitely true. Josh asks Kevin if he took $20,000, which Kevin denies, and Josh tells him to swear on his kids, and Kevin tells him not to bring up his kids. Josh does his usual crying after starting a fight, and Christmas clarifies two things. Kevin didn't swear on his kids about the $20,000 like he did about the match vote, so Kevin took the $20,000, but Alex was also the other match vote, so they need to boot Jason and Alex ASAP. There was another fight that they didn't show on the episodes until the recap, where Kevin was trying to give Matt information and to get Matt's jury vote. Matt reports to the herd what Kevin said. Kevin can see that Matt told them. This causes for Raven and Alex to end up arguing with Kevin and gets really, really nasty. So Matt gained an extra vote for willingly breaking a half-knot rule, which is just completely pathetic, and is evicted in a unanimous 6-0 vote. I remember so many people had such high hopes for Matt as a player in the beginning of the season, or even preseason especially, and he just completely flopped. He literally had no mind of his own. He always had to be told what to do by Paul, even if it was in his best interest. He volunteered to go on the block several times throughout the season for literally no reason. He even used the veto on someone else while he was on the block, and he didn't really care to be there. He kind of reminds me of Clay from BB19, but at least Clay actively played the game, was involved in a lot of the decision making, and was strategic and social. And Matt wasn't even very social with people in general, since a lot of the people in the herd mentioned that they didn't speak to him for 60-something days. And in addition to that, he was just very, very boring. Clearly one of the biggest duds that Big Brother has ever cast. Week 10 isn't really notable under any circumstance. The drama in the season for the most part has ended, and the structure that was created weeks ago is still put in place. Paul orchestrated a plan before the eviction to convince Alex and Jason that Kevin is the next target, so they convince Alex to throw the HOH since Kevin is going to drop, and has Kevin throw the competition, where Raven and Josh were told by Paul to let Christmas have the HOH competition. This plan has Christmas winning a track HOH competition. Remember, she has a broken foot. It just shows how idiotic and ridiculous this cast is, outside of Paul, who mentions that because they were on the block 7 times last season, Paul didn't have the time to think about the end game this season, which is actually a lie, since he always intended on going to the end with Victor last season, and there was a time last season where he intended on going to the end with Polly, but whatever. Raven is thrilled about blindsiding Jason and Alex this week, because of what they did to her last week. Alex tells Christmas to put her up as a pawn, which makes Christmas's job a lot easier. Jason tells Kevin that the latter will be nominated with Raven, but Kevin is choosing to believe Paul, who says that he won't be nominated. No one takes the Final Temptation apple, so this Final Temptation twist was overall a failure, as no one took it but Mark 2 weeks ago, and that led to nothing. Alex suggests for Paul to get Christmas to nominate Josh as a pawn, so Kevin feels like Josh the target before being backdoored. Christmas nominates Alex and Jason for eviction. Jason and Alex still don't fully believe about the plan of Kevin being backdoored, but they don't want to believe that they are the targets either. Paul continues to play dumb, though Jason knows that Paul knows everything in the house, so he isn't buying it much. Some of Paul's jury management flaws from last season starts to repeat here. with the constant denial and lying. Josh and Jason are talking about how Paul is playing dumb with everything, and after speaking to Kevin, who tells Jason that either him or Alex is going home, he realizes that there is a ruse, but Alex is not believing it. And there's a tendency for Alex to be overconfident and doubting Jason when he has the correct read on things, which has been persistent all season. Josh expresses his doubts about Paul after Jason mentions that Josh hasn't aligned with Christmas. Josh knows that Paul must have planted this, but Christmas shuts all of it down, which is just extremely frustrating. The plan was for Alex to throw the veto to Paul, but Alex doesn't end up doing this, which doesn't matter since Paul ends up winning the veto anyways. Josh and Christmas know the plan to take Alex off the block, but Josh makes his pitch to Paul in order to not use the veto, but Paul is doing this for his own move and game. Josh asks Christmas about Paul's pecking order, and she responds that after Jason, it is Alex, Raven, and Kevin. And Josh and walking out of the conversation, especially since it's clear that all of this is benefiting Paul. Christmas does not like that Josh walked off, so she lectures him to not walk away from her ever again, since they are just talking game and she's supporting him. Paul takes Alex off the block, and Christmas named Kevin the replacement nominee. Kevin is annoyed that he is nominated and is making it known, so it's causing Jason and Alex to feel really comfortable. Paul plans for this vote to come to a tie, so Christmas can make the tiebreaker vote, and Jason will not know that Paul was behind it, while he still has Alex on his side, or their side. Josh does not like this move, and is getting emotional about having to blindside his friend Jason, but knows that it is dumb to keep him in the house. Jason is evicted in a 3-2 vote, with Christmas making the tiebreaker vote, and Jason storms out of the house, thinking that Alex voted him out. Paul pretends to be mad at Josh after the eviction and makes a fake fight with him. Jason learns the truth through Josh's goodbye message, and Paul continues lying in his, which is a repeat of last season with what he did to Davon. I remember there's a point in the season where the editors tried to make Jason out to be the likable fan favorite, especially since the house was so unlikable and the likes of Cody and Jessica were gone at this point. And honestly, he wasn't as bad as the others, but he still wasn't good either. Jason was even more frustrating because you could tell that he was learning the game as he goes, but he almost always doubted himself or let Alex and Paul railroad him, to the point where he became a cult member where he had his own individual thoughts as well. And he started doing a lot of stupid things and was just way too blabbermouthed at times. In general, I think he's one of the cult members who does have potential to be better if he was on another season or situation, but I can't say that I like Jason overall. Alex wins the HOH in the double and nominates Raven and Kevin for eviction, since Paul convinced her to target them, despite being mad at Christmas and Josh. Josh wins the veto and does not use it, where he tells the house that he wants Kevin gone to get in good with Raven. Raven is evicted in a 2-1 vote, though Paul and Christmas planned for it to be a unanimous vote, so Josh went rogue. Raven reminds me a lot of Danielle from Big Brother 14, where they just lied about a whole lot of things. They had a quote-unquote quirky personality, though they're very nasty at times. But the only difference is that they actually showed Raven's craziness on the episodes, and Raven was a lot more passive when it came to the game. For some reason, she thought she had this amazing social game, but a lot of the housemates mentioned that she barely spoke to them as well. And while she was close in a lot of competitions, she was never able to pull one out. Raven always believed what Paul and other people said. She never really had any agency over the game. And in general, she was just very unlikable and irritating to watch throughout the season. So I can't even enjoy her for her randomness and her craziness, like some people do. Regarding week 11, it's the end game, and they're usually very quick and not very notable, so let's just get to it, especially in a predictable season like this. Alex was blindsided twice in one night, and the crying Josh is shocked that Paul can go from crying to smiling within a second. Paul convinces Kevin to throw the HOH and tells him that Christmas is going to be given the HOH, though Paul wants Josh to win the HOH. Josh feels a way that Christmas is continuing to defend Paul's gameplay, and Christmas is worried with Paul about Josh going rogue. Josh wins the HOH, and Alex knows that she has no control, though Kevin realizes that things aren't looking good for him. Josh is contemplating going after Paul, but it's all for naught, as he nominates Kevin and Alex for eviction. Alex feels betrayed by Josh, though she is claiming to have faked it, though Josh is subtly telling her that he's targeting someone else, and he is too subtle, which is the same thing that happened when Jessica was going home. Alex repeats this to Paul, who tells Josh that she mentioned that she is going to play into his emotions, and the trio talk about how much of a snake Alex is. Also, Josh approaches Christmas to make a final two, and she outright states that she doesn't want to make that choice. Bad and dumb move on her part, but she doesn't want to choose between Paul and Josh. Paul wins the veto and is not intending on using the veto, though Alex is expecting him to use it. Paul pulls Alex in the room to tell her that they've had a connection throughout the game, but he can't take her to the end. Since Christmas and Josh will be pissed, she already has a bunch of jury votes for her, and he doesn't want to make the same move that caused him to lose last season. Alex feels horrible about this and feels very stupid for everything that she did for him or them, and she would have been fine with losing to Paul. A mismanagement here, since someone who is as vindictive as Alex was not going to support him after he turned on her. Paul actually does break down to Christmas and Paul about the choice, so I do think his Raven Tales were at least somewhat real and sincere. Paul does not use the veto, of course, and Alex is evicted in a 2-1 vote, with Josh breaking the tie to evict her. Alex grated my nerves during this rewatch, and it's even worse because we all know that she got a very flattering edit as they wanted to make her as the likable, quirky, gamer, badass woman. But you saw a lot of the unlikable traits that were on the feed in the episodes here, and it's frustrating even more because she thought she was so much smarter and knew so much more about the game than she did. She really wasn't adaptable, was stuck on the Shamantis without realizing that she was going to be the next target after that, and never really listened to what Jason was saying, when it would have benefited her to do so. She also so stifled a lot of the game and season, so I just couldn't stand her watching the season, and I don't know if she has the ability to improve or learn. Definitely one of my least favorites of the season so far. Paul wins the HOH and nominates Josh and Kevin for eviction. Paul wins the veto and does not use it, and I didn't even realize that this Final Four is a repeat of Paul's Final Four in the last season with winning the HOH and veto. Everything is so standard, so there's nothing to say here. Kevin is evicted by Christmas's sole vote. Kevin had moments where he wanted to do his own thing, but he always went back to following Paul's lead, and whenever he tried to do his own thing, he was just way too sloppy and messy with it, while not having much grace at all. He could be kind of funny, but there are a lot of wild moments that involved Kevin on the feet and even on the show. And I definitely do think Kevin benefited from everyone else being completely horrid, but at the same time, I don't really care much for Kevin on his own as a player or as a personality in the season, and he fulfilled his role of being the seat filler in the Cult Alliance. I don't know if I would call Week 12 interesting, but I see why some people do call it interesting, because the results of the winner and the runner-up was so shocking at the time, and still kind of is looking back, where it caused a lot more intrigue than anything that happened within the last 10 weeks. So Paul convinces Josh to take Paul to the final two, since they lose to Christmas, which isn't even true with the information that we've gotten since. Paul wins part 1 of the final HOH, and Josh wins part 2 of the final HOH. Christmas essentially tells the others to take one another, which causes Josh to evict Christmas when he wins the final HOH. A part of me respects Christmas for persevering when she went through a life-altering, career-altering, and a physically altering experience with breaking her foot and having to adjust to that. At the same time, she was just very vile, cruel, mean, and toxic on the season, with how she handled people, how she liked to pile on others, and just her entire disposition. I do think she had some of the better reads in the season overall, and had most of the skill sets to do well in Big Brother, but she's just way too much of a team player and doesn't have any sense of agency, which is why she was playing mostly for the team instead of for herself, where if she was able to listen to a few of the things that Josh was telling her, she could have been much better as a player. So, Elena asks Paul about his orchestrated and participating in bullying tactics in the house, how it was necessary and how did it help his game, and Paul claims that he didn't use bullying tactics, but stood up for people who were not vocal, and it was something that everyone decided to speak about. Matt asks Josh about his big jury move and how he played the game, since some of the jurors don't feel like he did play the game, and Josh responds that he is a superfan and has been such since he was 14, so he envisioned this and said that his biggest move was his social game, aligning with Jason and Alex, the outsiders, and Christmas and Paul, who were in the 9-person alliance that would break up. He kept Jason and Alex calm, apparently, and Christmas fed him information, and he also got rid of Alex. Alex asks Paul about why he went against his friendship strategy from last season, and Paul mentions that people turned on him or were having hypothetical conversations about getting him out, so he tried helping others out, but he never said he would toss out his gang for others to win over him. Cody asks Josh about how the jury is wrong about playing for Josh instead of himself, and Josh responds that he played his own game, and his father gave him advice about giving his business partners the feelings that they were controlling everything, so he downplayed his intelligence, and Paul was a great ally and was loyal, so he stuck to him, which worked. Jason asks Paul about making moves, about avoiding making enemies in jury, and asks why he unnecessarily lied to the jurors up until the eviction, where Paul responds that he did and said everything that was going to be done, but if a house wanted a certain target out and he was outnumbered, there's nothing to be done. So he had to act a certain role and to compete in following weeks, so he threw some competitions. Mark asks Josh about him crying and apologizing and continuing despite starting arguments and how it helped his game, where Josh responds that he wanted to call people's gameplay, though he didn't feel good about it all the time, but it helped his position in the house essentially. Christmas asks Josh if he would evict Peppy or Crutches, and Josh answers Peppy. This is a clear throwaway question that means absolutely nothing. Paul's final speech is about how most of the house guests thought about getting him out, and he was the odd person out, so Paul had to play the game differently, with setting up targets and creating a structure, as he had a hand in everything that happened in the season, and a target in front of him all the time. He positioned himself between three pairs after the first double and let people win competitions to take one another out, where he maneuvered himself through that, won the most important HOH and veto of the season, winning 9 competitions and won the vetoes in each of his HOHs. Josh's final speech is about being a fan at 14, putting targets on people's back and exposing other shady games, aligning with Paul and Christmas, as well as Jason and Alex strategically, where they won most of the HOHs of the season. His first HOH sent Jessica home, his second HOH sent Alex home, adapted socially, played fearlessly, and he literally freezes in his speech as he gets very nervous, and he mentions how he played his heart out. He did not have a friendship bracelet and with after the Golden Apple, while hiding how much he loves Big Brother. Josh wins the season in a 5-4 vote. So I find it interesting how people act like Paul changed so much from last season to this season, though essentially all of the negative traits that were in this season were present last season, but people liked to blame it on Victor, Polly, or Josiah. And with the privilege of being a veteran and having that status, it just enabled all these negative qualities. While Paul tried to overcorrect what caused him to lose last season, with taking the easier goat to the end instead of the threats, and not playing from the bottom, Paul didn't watch any of last season and wasn't a fan of Big Brother in general, so Paul didn't know that it's better to own up to your game when it comes to a jury vote, and it seems like Paul has an issue with accountability in general, despite doing well in competitions, thriving even more strategically, and having a good social game until people talked in the jury house. This season is definitely the season of Paul and why Paul lost, but I don't think it was a good choice to bring Paul back. The season after he made it to the end and having Paul be the only veteran, which is almost came off as a waste. And I'm sure the psyche didn't do well for Paul after the season. So it is interesting rewatching this season, especially with rewatching Josh on The Challenge. And one thing that I noticed is that his diary rooms are extremely scripted and he's screaming like hell in his diary rooms in Big Brother. At the same time, Josh essentially did what he was told for most of the season, and while he had other instincts at times, he never acted upon them, and Josh definitely had the personality, or has the personality that caused him to be booted earlier than later, but everyone saw him as unstable, a non-threat, and someone that they could manipulate and use as their mouthpiece, which definitely happened. Josh was a lot more unlikable than I remember in the season, and I really just didn't like how vile Josh was from the very beginning. But it is kind of crazy that Josh is the only one from this cast who has remained on reality TV, while the others got their lashings and went back to their lives. When it comes to the game, I don't think much of Josh as a player, and I think a lot of things kind of just fell into Josh's lap, where Christmas and Paul were definitely guiding him through a lot of the season strategically and even socially. Wow, that was an exhausting watch. And the season has aged a lot worse, where essentially no one comes out of it on a better light. The strategy outside of Paul was just really horrible and blatantly non existent for many people. And there are, of course, some of the people who are only there for screen time and to get to the jury, so that also didn't help. And I remember people being so excited for this cast before we knew that Paul was on it. And a part of me wonders if the season would have been so much better and if they would have grown as players and if it would have been a lot more interesting if Paul wasn't on the cast. But of course, we will never know. Despite this being the rare season that actually had ratings increase compared to the increasingly declining ratings over the last decade from one season to the next, you could definitely tell that CBS was not proud of the season and they kind of pushed it under the rug. The drama is not the enjoyable kind that you would love from Big Brother, despite there being a few decent fights, and a lot of it was just unnecessary gang ups and orchestrated plots. And the cast was really unlikable, and you don't feel good about the season after it's done. And the fact that Josh wins instead of Paul kind of makes it feel even ickier, since you don't even revel in Paul's downfall, since you could definitely tell that they are avoiding giving Paul the villain edit for as long as possible throughout the season. There is definitely a high chance that the season is going to be last on my list as of right now, and I am so not looking forward to ranking this cast as game players in their game players tier ranking, since I don't think highly about like 95% of the cast. So that's going to be even more excruciating than just talking about the season and the events that happened. So thank you all for watching this video. You can follow me on Twitter, which is lala_Annie, and I will be back with some other content soon. Bye!